So yesterday I spoke a little bit about the class balance changes and some builds to look out for. But if I'm being honest here, guys, these changes don't really change anything in my opinion. And if it were to do like the absolute most that I think it could, you might see like Fireball being somewhat of an interesting build, and you might see like maybe some bleed barbs running around, chain lightning sorcerers running around a little bit more. Overall, the buffs don't really change the like core mechanics to a lot of these classes, and I don't think anything's really going to come out of them. The thing that I really want to focus on is actually the other changes. In particular, there's a few that I want to highlight. First off, the monster density. Now, I had to go back just to kind of go through this image, and I actually went through and counted it myself. I had a couple other people count it, and I was like, you know what? I'll count it as well here. And I got to roughly about 115 little red dots here. And then the next image, this has like roughly 180 red dots. So we're looking to see about a 50% increase in monster density. Now, if they keep the XP rates the same, you can potentially see as much as a 50% increase in experience rates. It's not quite going to be that because you still have to kill the monsters and all that good stuff. So maybe like a 30 to 40% increase in XP rates, which is really, really awesome. But also, it's just more fun, right? I mean, killing more monsters is just more fun. This is probably the thing I'm most excited about, which is kind of funny. And I mean, I just have to highlight this real quick, but the path that they're following towards balancing this game makes absolutely no sense, as most people would say in many games. But you have them nerfing basically every class, then immediately after they're buffing every single class by nerfing the nightmare dungeons down to our power level, so we're basically as strong as we were before, but we're not because we got nerfed. And then they go ahead and continuously nerf all of our density of our dungeons. They buff nightmare dungeons, and then they're like, wait a second, our nightmare dungeons aren't actually as dense as they were before, so we're gonna buff it back to kind of what it was before, or at least like in a similar way. It's like, what is going on here? But with that said, this is going to be a good change for us to experience, and all of these things are happening today, as far as we know, unless they get delayed or anything. But the next one, and this is a scary one, monsters above, or bosses specifically, above level 60 are going to have increased HP. Now, we talked about this in, again, previous videos, but when we're doing like tier 80s, tier 90s, tier 100s, or even like, let's say tier 50s and tier 60s, you're going to fight monsters that are around this like level 100 to 150 bracket. And so you could at least bare minimum expect, level 100 monsters to have 100% increased XP or health here. So straight up doubling it. That's a ton. And some builds have a little bit of a hard time dealing with single target bosses. So what this will end up doing, I think, is shaking up what nightmare dungeons potentially are the best, the ones without bosses. But I don't even know if that's necessarily true. That could happen. But I think what will really happen is we'll just be focusing more on a little bit more single target damage, because they mentioned that the rewards for killing these bosses are also going to increase. Now, they didn't mention how in this post. They talked a little bit about lower level stuff, but they did talk about how they wanted to not only increase the HP, but also increase the rewards, which is something that I think a lot of people missed on when they were going through the live stream. So this is going to be a pretty interesting pairing, I guess you could say, where you have the increased density. So you'd actually rather go ahead and farm a lot of monsters because the density is increased. But now your bosses are increased in HP. So the conclusion is probably that, well, bosses, yeah, you might get a little bit more loot, maybe, but you're probably going to get far less XP unless they drastically increase the XP as well. Because with the density buffs, it kind of indirectly nerfs boss fights. Because, well, why would I do a boss fight when there's so many better ways to kill a bunch of monsters to get better XP, better loot quicker because of the increased density? So I think that both increasing the boss's HP and increasing the density is actually a bad thing for boss fights. And I actually think it'll actively discourage a lot of builds and a lot of people from doing boss fights, especially with a part as powerful as, for example, the Barber, where you're just crushing through everything in a pure AoE fashion. So I wouldn't be surprised if people just ignore bosses going forward. So as for the other thing, and I think this is probably something pretty cool for you more casual players out there, but even the people that might want to mess around and change their builds, are the minor quality of life improvements, particularly the skill reset cost reduction is going to be pretty cool. But also, I think that in general, just a lot of these different quality of life improvements are going to be a little bit nice. Especially the Nightmare Dungeon affixes being removed. Ooh, man. Resource burn, backstabbers, and cold enchanted are brutal, and oftentimes I will just not play with the backstabbers and resource burn. Like you find it, it's a dead sigil, you just salvage it. The empowered elites I sometimes will do. With the rogue, you have so much cooldown reduction and options there if you're deciding to do that, and CC breaks that you don't really have to worry about that too much. But man, the backstabbers and resource burn are just impossible to come back from oftentimes. So this is going to be a really nice update, and really, really going to help out your experience gains indirectly as well as your loot generation, because you're not going to be going through a lot more of your sigils and not like running more sigils because you're not getting as much sigil powder. Now, this doesn't matter for a lot of more end game players. Like I have so much sigil powder, this doesn't really apply to me anymore. But for those of you that might be just approaching world tier 3, world tier 4, this is going to help out a lot for you to avoid getting some absolutely meme sigils, or a meme of a sigil, because backstabbers, resource burn, and empowered elites for some builds are just unplayable. They're just unplayable. So this is interesting, and I feel like the update was actually pretty good, despite the fact that the class balances were kind of like a joke. But what's awkward about it is it's hard to say that this like patch is good, and a lot of people kind of joke about this, but it's a patch kind of just reverting the other things that they've updated and made worse, while also just listening to some of our feedback. So I would say overall W for Blizzard, but it just doesn't make much sense to me that they're just kind of flip-flopping backwards. I don't know if they know what's going on over there, but we'll have to see how a few of these things roll out. So definitely try out some bosses, definitely see if there's going to be an increased reward, whether or not it's worth it. And I definitely recommend going through some of the Nightmare Dungeons and trying to compare it to what you were experiencing before. I know I will be charting a lot of my XP rates for some of my favorite Nightmare Dungeons and comparing before and after, and I'll have a video out on that soon. So if you guys want to check that out, be sure to sub to the channel. But let me know what your thoughts are on these parts of the patch, because it's honestly not talked about a lot, because so many people are focusing on the class balance, which is to be fair, like a little bit of a meme. So I understand why people are talking about it. I've been talking about it as well, but I'm curious to hear about your thoughts for the density and some of the other changes regarding XP and health and all that stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.